They say money can buy anything, but what if it only buys loneliness? Eleanora Hartwell stood at her kitchen window, her fingers tracing the cold rim of her coffee cup as she stared out across Meadowbrook Ranch. The land stretched for miles, golden pastures, white fence glinting in the sunlight, horses grazing in the distance. Once that view had made her feel alive. Now it only reminded her of everything she'd lost. It had been 3 months since Charles, her husband of 20 years, died in that terrible riding accident. The lawyer said she was set for life. Cattle, oil, property, all adding up to nearly $8 million. But no amount of wealth could fill the empty bed or the silence that echoed through the big farmhouse. The creak of a step on the front porch made her freeze. No one came here without calling first. The nearest neighbor was miles away. She peeked through the lace curtain and caught her breath. A giant of a man stood there, tall, broad, and sunburned. He looked like he'd stepped straight out of the wild country itself. His hat was crushed from wear, his denim shirt faded, and his boots covered in dust. But it wasn't his size that startled her. It was the look in his green eyes. Desperation. Have you ever been so desperate that you'd kneel before a stranger and beg for a chance? Have you ever been so lonely that you'd risk everything for someone who sees you when the world looks away? Eleanora hesitated, then opened the door a crack. "Ma'am," the man said, removing his hat respectfully. "My name's Jake Sullivan. I heard about your husband's passing. I'm real sorry for your loss. I was hoping you might have work." Eleanora's first thought was to shut the door. A strange man alone, miles from town. It wasn't safe. But something about his trembling voice stopped her. "I'm sorry," she said, her tone cautious. "I'm not hiring anyone right now. I might even sell the ranch." Jake's shoulders slumped, and for a moment this enormous man looked small. "Please, Mrs. Hartwell," he said softly. "I've been out of work for months. Lost my last job when the Henderson Ranch closed down. I got nowhere to go. I can fix fences, work cattle, maintain machinery. I don't drink. I don't cause trouble. I just need a chance." Eleanora saw the truth in his face. His jaw was tight, his hand shaking slightly as he clutched his hat. This wasn't just about work. This was about survival. "Where have you been staying?" she asked carefully. Jake's eyes dropped. "Mostly in my truck. Sometimes the shelter in Billings, when the weather gets too bad." The words hit her harder than she expected. A man that strong, that capable, sleeping in his truck. Life could be cruel. Still, she hesitated. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sullivan, but—" Before she could finish, Jake dropped to one knee on her porch. "Please, ma'am," he said hoarsely, "give me a chance. I'll work for half wages. Room and board's enough. Just let me prove myself." The sight of this giant man kneeling before her sent Eleanora's heart into a wild rhythm. She looked around nervously, praying no one would see. "Get up," she whispered. Jake stood, face flushed. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you." She closed her eyes for a moment. Logic screamed to send him away, but compassion whispered otherwise. She knew too well what it felt like to be lost, desperate for purpose. "There's an old bunkhouse behind the barn," she said finally. "It hasn't been used in years, but if you want to stay there a few days while you look for other work, that's fine." Jake blinked as if unsure he'd heard her right. Then his whole face lit up. "Thank you, ma'am. I promise you won't regret this." As he walked toward the bunkhouse, Eleanora watched his huge frame move with quiet determination. A strange feeling stirred inside her, relief, curiosity, maybe something more. She couldn't tell. By the next morning, Jake had already begun proving himself. When Eleanora looked out from her window, she saw him repairing the fence line with strong, sure movements. He worked hard, hardly taking breaks, and by evening he'd fixed what would have taken a hired crew 2 days. The following days went the same. He cleaned out the barn, mended the windmill, and even got the stubborn water pump running again. Every job he touched seemed to come back to life, just like the ranch itself. But something else was happening too. Something Eleanora hadn't expected. She found herself watching him more than she should have. The way his muscles moved under his shirt when he worked in the heat, the sound of his low voice when he talked to the horses, the quiet respect he carried, even in exhaustion. And then came the guilt. Charles had only been gone 3 months. How could she think of another man already? On Friday evening, Jake came to the house. He stood at the door, hat in hand, looking awkward. "Ma'am," he said, "it's been a week now. I just wanted to thank you. You didn't have to help me. I'll be moving on tomorrow if you want me gone." Eleanora's heart clenched. The thought of him leaving made the house feel empty again. "Have you found work somewhere else?" she asked. Jake shook his head. "I've tried everywhere. Nobody will hire me without references. Why don't you have any?" He looked down. "Because of something that happened at my last job. The rancher's daughter took a liking to me. She was married. When I turned her down, her husband caught her trying to kiss me. I was fired before I could explain." Eleanora stared at him. "So you were punished for something you didn't do?" Jake gave a small, bitter laugh. "Story of my life. People look at my size and think I'm trouble. I ain't. I was raised to respect women, to work hard. But that doesn't count for much when you're broke and alone." The sincerity in his voice made her throat tighten. "Stay," she said suddenly. Jake blinked. "What?" "Stay here. Work for me. I'll pay you fairly. You can live in the bunkhouse. I could use the help." For a moment, Jake just stared. Then his eyes filled with tears he tried to hide. "You mean it?" "I mean it." Jake's whole body relaxed, and he smiled, a real, warm smile that softened his rough features. "Thank you, Mrs. Hartwell. You won't regret it." But as he walked back to the bunkhouse, Eleanora wasn't so sure. She'd just invited a stranger into her world, a man whose presence stirred emotions she thought had died with her husband. And deep down, she already knew something powerful was beginning, something neither of them would be able to stop. Do you believe that sometimes the people we hire to fix our fences end up fixing our hearts instead? That loneliness recognizes loneliness even when pride tries to hide it? 2 months passed, and the ranch no longer felt like a ghost town. Jake had brought it back to life. Fences fixed, barns repaired, animals thriving again. But it wasn't just the land that had changed. Eleanora had changed too. She laughed again. She cooked more. And at night, when she looked out the window and saw the faint light glowing from the bunkhouse, she didn't feel quite so alone. Most evenings after dinner, she would bring him leftovers, cornbread, stew, sometimes pie. They'd sit together on the porch of the bunkhouse, the sky turning pink and gold as the sun set behind the hills. Their conversation started simple: weather, ranch work, daily chores. But soon they drifted deeper. Jake told her about his life. His parents had died in a car accident when he was 12. He'd grown up in foster care, shuffled from one home to another. His size made people fear him. By 16, he'd learned to stay quiet, to avoid trouble, to expect little from anyone. "I always dreamed of having a place like this," he said one evening, staring out over the fields. "A place where I could belong. Maybe even a family someday." Eleanora smiled sadly. "Why haven't you?" He shrugged. "Hard to build a family when you're living out of your truck." Her heart ached at the truth in his words. The right woman would see past that, she said softly. Jake turned to her, his green eyes steady. "Would she?" His voice was low, almost daring. "Would you?" The question hit her like lightning. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The air between them thickened with tension. Before she could answer, she stood abruptly. "I should go," she whispered. "It's late." As she walked back to the house, she could feel his eyes on her back, and her pulse raced like she was 20 again. The next few weeks were full of quiet chaos. Their work continued, but the air between them was different, charged, heavy with what neither dared to say. Eleanora caught herself looking for excuses to be near him, to talk, to simply hear his deep, calm voice. And Jake seemed to find reasons to linger near the house, always close, always protective. Then came that rainy Thursday in October. The sky turned black before noon, and the wind howled across the open fields. By evening, thunder cracked like cannon fire. When Eleanora returned from town, she found Jake standing in her kitchen, soaked through, dripping water onto the floor. "Jake," she gasped. "What on earth happened?" "The roof's leaking in the bunkhouse," he said through chattering teeth. "Tried to patch it, but the rain's too heavy." She grabbed a towel and wrapped it around his shoulders. "You can't stay out there tonight. You'll get sick." "I'll be fine," he said quickly, but she could hear the shiver in his voice. "No," she said firmly. "You'll stay here. The guest room's empty." Jake hesitated, his jaw tightening. "I don't think that's a good idea." "Why not?" He met her eyes then, and she saw the truth he'd been hiding for weeks. "Because I'm in love with you," he said quietly. The world seemed to stop. Eleanora stared at him, her heart hammering in her chest. She'd known it deep down. She'd seen it in the way he looked at her, in the gentleness of his voice, in how carefully he treated her. But hearing it out loud made it real and terrifying. "Jake, don't," she whispered. "I know I shouldn't," he said, his voice trembling. "I know you're grieving, and I work for you, and people will talk. But I can't help it. You're beautiful, you're kind, and you gave me a chance when no one else would." Eleanora felt tears in her eyes. "Jake, this can't happen. My husband. Your husband's gone," Jake said softly. "And I'm not trying to replace him. I just want to be here for you." She took a step back, her heart torn in two. "You need to leave the kitchen," she said quietly. "Please." Jake's shoulders sagged. "I'll pack up in the morning." "No," she said quickly. "Don't leave the ranch. Just keep your distance. We need boundaries." He nodded, his expression unreadable. Then he walked out into the storm, leaving her standing in the silence of her kitchen, trembling. The days that followed were torture. Jake worked harder than ever, barely speaking except when necessary. Eleanora threw herself into the ranch accounts, but her mind was never on the numbers. Every night, she'd look out at the bunkhouse and wonder if he was awake too, thinking about her. Then one afternoon, her sister-in-law Patricia showed up unannounced. Patricia was sharp-tongued and judgmental, the kind of woman who always had an opinion to share and rarely a kind one. "So," Patricia said, glancing out the window where Jake was fixing a fence. "Who's that brute?" "He's my ranch hand," Eleanora said evenly. Patricia raised an eyebrow. "You hired him yourself?" "Yes." "Well," Patricia sniffed, "people in town are talking. They say you're having an affair with him." Eleanora felt the color rise in her cheeks. "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Patricia leaned closer, her voice dripping with poison. "You're a wealthy widow alone on a ranch, and he's living right there on your property. What do you expect people to think?" Eleanora's hands clenched. "He's a good man. He's earned his place here." Patricia smirked. "If you care about your reputation, or your late husband's name, you'll fire him before this becomes a scandal." That evening, Eleanora stood outside the bunkhouse door, her heart heavy. When Jake opened it, his face brightened for a moment, then dimmed when he saw her expression. "Mrs. Hartwell, we need to talk." Inside, the bunkhouse was simple: a bed, a small table, a few books neatly stacked. It was a space of quiet discipline, and it made her heart ache even more. "People are talking," she began. Jake's jaw tightened. "About us?" "Yes, about the impropriety of it all." "Let them talk." "I can't," she said softly. "I have a name to protect, my husband's memory to honor." Jake stood silent for a long moment. "Are you firing me?" Eleanora's throat tightened. "I think it would be best." The silence that followed was unbearable. Jake's face was calm, but his eyes were full of pain. "I understand," he said quietly. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "What if there's another way?" Eleanora turned, confused. "What do you mean?" Jake took a deep breath, then dropped to one knee again, his voice rough with emotion. "Marry me," he said. Eleanora's breath caught. "What?" "I know how it sounds. I know I'm not good enough for you. But I love you, Eleanora. And I think you might love me too." She stared at him, stunned, her world tilting. Then Jake's voice broke, trembling with something raw and desperate. "Please, let me stay and work for you. I'll take care of you. I can make you happy. I can even—" He hesitated, his cheeks burning. "I can even get you pregnant again." The word struck her like a bolt of lightning. She stared at the giant man kneeling before her, his heart laid bare, and felt something shift inside her. Was this madness, or the most honest thing she'd ever been offered? Have you ever had someone offer you not just their love, but their entire future? Have you ever realized that the thing you feared most was exactly what you needed? Eleanora stared at Jake, her mind spinning. The rain hammered against the roof, but all she could hear was his trembling voice. He was still kneeling, his huge frame bent low, his heart laid bare before her. "Get up," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Not until you answer me," Jake said, his eyes shining with desperation and hope. "I know it's crazy. I know I'm not what you planned. But Eleanora, Sometimes life gives us what we need, not what we expect. She felt the weight of his words sink deep into her chest. Every logical thought screamed that this was madness. But then another voice whispered, maybe this was what her lonely heart had been waiting for. People will think I've lost my mind, she murmured. Jake rose slowly, his face tender now. Let them talk all they want. They don't know what's between us. Eleanora felt her throat tighten. Jake, I don't even know if this can work. We're so different. Different don't matter when two hearts beat the same way. Jake said softly, you gave me a chance when I had nothing. Let me give you something back. A reason to smile again. His words broke the last wall she'd built around herself. She looked at him, the man who'd come to her doorstep, broken and desperate, the man who'd brought her ranch and her heart back to life. And she saw not a risk, but a miracle. Maybe I am crazy, she whispered. Jake took a small step closer. Is that a yes? She looked up at him, and a smile tugged at her lips. Yes. For a second, Jake didn't move. Then his face transformed with pure, unfiltered joy. He pulled her into his arms, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. She didn't resist. Her arms went around his neck, and for the first time in months, Eleanora felt alive. They married quietly in the courthouse at Billings 2 weeks later. Eleanora wore a soft blue dress. Jake bought his first suit with the little money he'd saved. There were no flowers, no guests, no fancy celebration, just two people choosing each other despite everything. When they returned to the ranch, the phone started ringing. Friends, neighbors, even Patricia, all with the same question. Why? You've lost your senses, Patricia hissed during one call. A man like that has nothing to offer you. Eleanora's voice stayed calm. You're wrong. He's given me everything that matters. And it was true. Life with Jake was simple but full. He worked from dawn till dusk, not because he had to, but because he wanted to build something for both of them. He treated her with respect and warmth, always gentle, always patient. Nights were different too. Jake's strength, which had once seemed intimidating, now made her feel safe. His touch was tender, his love deep and real. He never rushed her, never demanded anything. He loved her as if she were the most precious thing on earth. 3 months later, when Eleanor's period was late, she thought it was just stress. But when the small test in her hand showed 2 pink lines, her breath caught. Jake found her standing in the bathroom, tears in her eyes. What's wrong? He asked, panicked. She turned to him, holding up the test. Jake, we're having a baby. For a moment he was silent. Then his knees gave out, and he sank to the floor, his face pressed to her stomach. Thank you, he whispered, his voice breaking. Thank you for believing in me. Eleanora ran her hands through his hair, smiling through her tears. You've given me a reason to believe again. The news spread fast through town. People who had gossiped before now fell silent. The widow and the giant had made their own family, and nothing could undo it. Patricia called again, her tone softer this time. You really are happy, aren't you? I am, Eleanora said simply. From that day, even Patricia stopped questioning her choices. Jake took over more of the ranch work, protecting Eleanora like she was made of glass. He'd place his large hand gently over her growing belly and talk to the baby for hours. Sometimes Eleanora would watch him from the porch, her heart full. I never thought I'd have this, Jake said one evening as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold. Have what? A family. A home. Someone who loves me. Eleanora leaned her head against his shoulder. I never thought I'd have this either. He smiled down at her. A baby. No, she whispered. A love story. Jake turned to her then, and in his green eyes she saw their entire future. The child they'd raise, the ranch they'd build, the love they'd protect. I love you, he said quietly. I love you too, she replied. And this time it wasn't loneliness speaking. It was peace, pure and complete. That night, as they sat together under the stars, the ranch silent except for the distant howl of a coyote, Eleanora realized how far she'd come. She'd once believed her life had ended with Charles's death, but it had only just begun, with a man who'd come to her doorstep begging for a chance. A man who taught her that love wasn't about what you owned, but what you gave. Wealth could build walls, but love built homes. As Jake's arm tightened around her, Eleanora smiled softly. The lonely widow and the desperate cowboy had found their happy ending, not in luxury or status, but in each other. And as the stars sparkled above the Montana sky, their love story began its next chapter, quiet, enduring, and more beautiful than either of them had ever dared to dream. Do you believe that sometimes the people we think are too different from us are exactly who we need? That real wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the courage to choose love when the world tells you it's foolish? This story reminds us that desperation can lead to devotion, that kneeling before someone can be the strongest thing you ever do, and that sometimes the boldest proposal isn't, "Will you marry me?" but "Let me love you the way you deserve." If this story moved you, subscribe to hear more tales from ranches and lonely hearts, stories of wealthy widows who found richness in unexpected arms, desperate men who offered everything including futures unborn, and love that grew not from convenience, but from two broken people choosing to be whole together. Share your thoughts if you believe that sometimes the most scandalous thing you can do is follow your heart instead of your reputation, and that real family begins not with bloodlines, but with someone kneeling before you saying, "Give me a chance, and I'll give you everything."